A lone farmer broke the only rule a native girl had given him: never cross the sacred ridge. But when fire threatened to erase her entire village, his defiance became their salvation. In the ashes of danger, trust and love were born, where none had dared to hope. Let's get started in the Oklahoma Territory of 1876. Life moved slowly for Ethan, a quiet farmer who had settled on the edges of wild land, where prairies rolled endlessly toward the horizon. He was not a man of many words, and though the nearest town was a day's ride away, his true neighbors were the people of a small native village a few miles from his cabin. Among them was a young woman named Tala, sharp-eyed and graceful, who often met him during his visits to trade corn, beans, or dried venison. Their exchanges were simple, but always carried a warmth that unsettled Ethan's solitude. Tala's voice held both kindness and command when she told him more than once, "Never cross the sacred ridge. That is our only rule." He listened, curious but respectful, aware that some boundaries existed beyond his right to question. Yet, curiosity was something Ethan could never fully put to rest. He often found himself glancing toward the ridge whenever he worked his fields, watching the line of stone and brush that rose against the sky like a guardian. The people of the village treated it with reverence, never setting foot beyond it, and he wondered if it marked some burial ground or perhaps a place of spirits and old stories. Though he had never asked Tala directly, he sensed that to press too far would be to trample on something sacred, something she guarded with her very being. Ethan respected her warnings, but deep in his heart, the ridge had become more than just a landmark. It was a mystery that called to him, especially when the prairie winds shifted and he felt that unseen things were stirring just beyond his sight. One restless evening, as dusk painted the fields in deep amber, Ethan was putting away his tools when he saw something strange. A faint line of smoke rose from behind the ridge, thin and pale against the dying sky. His first thought was of campfires, perhaps hunters from another tribe or drifters moving through the land. But as he studied it, the smoke grew thicker, twisting into darker plumes that spread with an urgency no ordinary fire should carry. Ethan's chest tightened. Fire was a killer on the plains, a beast that devoured without mercy. In a land this dry, it could sweep across fields and villages in hours, leaving nothing but ash. Without thinking, he grabbed his spade, a wet sack, and mounted his horse, the warning of Tala echoing in his mind like a chain he was about to break. When he reached the base of the ridge, the air was already heavy with heat and the bitter stench of burning grass. Flames crackled hungrily through the undergrowth, dancing like devils against the rocks. Ethan's heart pounded as he dismounted and scrambled up the slope, each step carrying him deeper into forbidden ground. He remembered Tala's face, the sharpness in her eyes when she told him never to come here, and guilt pressed against him. But guilt was quickly drowned by urgency. The fire was spreading fast, and if it reached the open prairie, it would rush straight toward the village. Ethan knew he had no time for hesitation. Sacred or not, this land was now a battlefield, and he was the only soldier standing between the flames and the people he had come to know. Sweat poured down his face as he tore at the dry grass with his spade, digging frantically to carve a trench. The soil was hard and stubborn, and his palms blistered with each thrust, but he worked as though his very blood fueled his strength. He laid the wet sack across sparks when they jumped too close, stomping at stray flames with his boots. The smoke stung his eyes, blurring the edges of the fire into a glowing haze, but still he pressed on. Every breath seared his lungs, but every glance behind reminded him why he fought, because beyond that ridge lay the village, children and elders who would have no chance against the blaze. He thought of Tala, her warning, her pride, and the life that would be lost if he failed. That thought alone kept his body moving, even as exhaustion dragged him down. The sky darkened, and the fire roared like a living creature, but Ethan's trench began to take shape, a ragged line of defense cutting through the grass. When the flames reached it, they snarled, spitting sparks into the air, but could not leap across. He widened the line, moving along its edge, his arms trembling with fatigue. His shirt clung to him with sweat and soot, his throat raw from smoke, yet his will refused to break. In that moment, Ethan felt smaller than he had ever felt, a man pitted against a force far greater than himself. And yet, in that same moment, he also felt a strange strength, as though the land itself had lent him its endurance for the sake of those he was trying to save. Time lost its meaning as the night fell around him. The fire did not vanish, it raged and hissed, but with each trench dug and each spark beaten back, its path bent away from the ridge, curling harmlessly into the rocky canyon beyond. At last, Ethan collapsed to his knees, gasping, his body coated in ash. He could barely lift his arms anymore, and yet, when he looked out at the fire's course, he saw that the village was safe. His heart hammered with relief but also fear. What would Tala say? What would the tribe do when they learned he had crossed into the forbidden land? Would they see his actions as protection or as violation? For the first time that night, doubt crept into his weary mind. Ethan sat in the dirt, staring into the last flickers of the fire, and realized the weight of what he had done. He had broken the one rule that had always been made clear to him. He had trespassed on land marked sacred, and in doing so might have placed himself outside their trust forever. Yet deep within his heart, he knew there had been no other choice. He thought of the children he had seen playing at the edge of the village, the laughter of mothers, the proud faces of elders. He thought of Tala, the way her eyes had warned him, and the way he prayed she would someday understand. He had not broken the rule to defy her, but to protect her. And in that choice, his fate had changed forever. By the time Ethan stumbled back toward his horse, the fire's glow had dimmed to embers, leaving behind only smoke and scorched earth. His body ached with every movement, but his mind was consumed by the knowledge that nothing would be the same. He had crossed the line, literally and in spirit. Whether the tribe would see him as a savior or an intruder, he could not know. Yet one truth stood unshaken. He had seen the fire first, and he had fought it alone. If the sacred ridge held secrets, perhaps those secrets had called to him for this very reason. And as he rode slowly toward his cabin, exhausted but unbroken, he knew that whatever came next, the night's choice would follow him always. By dawn, the prairie lay quiet, blanketed in ash where the fire had raged. The rising sun bled across the horizon, lighting the smoke like faint ghosts drifting toward the sky. Ethan's body ached, his palms blistered raw, but he forced himself to stand as he heard voices approaching. The villagers came in a solemn line, Tala at the front, her dark hair loose in the morning wind. She stopped. Before him, her expression unreadable. Her eyes lingered on the blackened ridge, then on the weary man who had dared to cross it. "You disobeyed me," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of tradition. "But you also saved us." Behind her, the people murmured, their gazes shifting from the ruined land to the farmer covered in soot and sweat. Ethan's heart pounded. This was the moment of judgment, and he had no defense but the truth of what he had done. For a long time, silence hung heavy between them. Ethan lowered his head, willing himself to accept whatever came. He had expected anger, perhaps even exile, for breaking their sacred rule. But as he stood there, bracing for her condemnation, Tala's hand reached out and lifted his chin. Her fingers were cool against his soot-stained skin, her eyes steady as they locked with his. "The ridge is sacred," she said softly, "but so is life. You risked yours for ours." She turned to her people then, raising her voice so all could hear. "This man fought the fire alone, with no promise of reward. He is no trespasser, he is protector." Murmurs rose again, this time not of suspicion but of respect. Some of the elders nodded gravely, as though acknowledging a truth too clear to deny. Ethan's chest tightened with relief, though doubt still lingered. Had he truly earned their trust, or was this only a temporary grace? That evening, when the village gathered to share food and assess the damage, Ethan found himself seated among them for the first time. Children peeked curiously at him, their small eyes shining with the awe of his deeds. Warriors who had once regarded him with caution now offered him silent nods, acknowledging his courage. He ate slowly, humbled by the acceptance he had not expected. Across the fire, Tala sat with the elders, her face lit by the flames. Every so often, her gaze drifted toward him, not stern as before, but softened with something new. Ethan thought of the long nights when he had sat alone in his cabin, the emptiness echoing louder than the wind outside. Tonight, surrounded by voices and warmth, he felt a belonging he had not known since childhood. Perhaps the fire had burned more than grass and brush. Perhaps it had burned away the distance between him and them. Later, when the gathering had quieted and the stars filled the sky, Tala approached him where he sat at the edge of the firelight. Her steps were graceful but purposeful, her expression thoughtful. "When I told you not to cross the ridge," she said, her voice low enough for only him to hear, "I thought it was to protect the land. But now I see it was also to protect you from us, from mistrust, from the burden of what we guard." She paused, studying him carefully. "And yet by crossing, you showed me something I did not expect, that trust can be earned even in the breaking of a rule." Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking deep. "I never wanted to dishonor you," he murmured, "but I couldn't stand by and watch your home burn." She nodded slowly, her eyes softening again. "That is why I believe you now belong with us." The following days were filled with rebuilding. Ethan worked alongside the villagers, hauling charred wood, repairing huts and digging new trenches to guard against future flames. His muscles screamed with exhaustion, but his spirit thrived in the rhythm of shared labor. The people no longer looked at him as an outsider. He was a man who had proven himself by sweat and sacrifice. Each evening, Tala would bring water to where he worked, her presence quiet but steady. Their conversations grew longer, no longer guarded, drifting from practical matters to the stories of their childhoods, their fears, their dreams. For Ethan, every word she shared felt like a gift, as though she were slowly unlocking the door of her heart. He had once thought himself destined to live alone, a man apart. Now he began to wonder if fate had brought him here not just to farm the land, but to find her. One night, as the moon hung low and silver, Ethan walked the ridge again, not in secret, but with Tala by his side. The land still bore the scars of fire, yet in the silence there was also renewal. Grass already pushed through the blackened soil, a sign that life would return. Tala stopped, her face turned toward the stars. "This place has always been sacred," she said, "because it reminds us of the spirits who guard our people. But tonight, I believe it is sacred for another reason. Here is where you chose us over yourself. Here is where everything changed." Ethan looked at her, the weight of her words pressing deep into him. For the first time, he reached for her hand. She did not pull away. Their fingers intertwined, fragile but unbroken, like the first shoots of green pushing through ash. The ridge had once divided them, but now it bound them together. Weeks turned to months, and the fire became a story retold around the village fires, a tale of warning, but also of hope. Ethan remained not as a visitor, but as one of their own. He tended his farm, yet his harvest was shared with the people he now called family. Tala walked beside him, her laughter filling the spaces where once there had only been silence. Their bond deepened, not through grand declarations, but through countless small acts of trust, the way she brought herbs for his wounds, the way he carved her a necklace from cedar, the way they met each other's gaze and found no need for words. The man who had once been alone was alone no more. The rule had been broken, yes, but in its breaking, something stronger had been built. Love forged in fire, bound by courage, and sealed by the quiet strength of two hearts. As autumn rolled across the plains, painting the grass in gold, Ethan stood at the edge of the ridge once more. He looked out over the land that had tested him and changed him, his arm around Tala's shoulders. The memory of that night, the smoke, the flames, the fear, still lingered, but it no longer haunted him. Instead, it reminded him of the turning point, the moment when his life had shifted from solitude to belonging. Tala leaned into him, her eyes bright with peace. "The fire could have destroyed us," she said softly, "but instead it gave us a new beginning." Ethan pressed his lips to her hair, his heart swelling with gratitude. What had started as a single act of defiance had grown into a bond neither fire nor fear could break. And so, in the quiet of the Oklahoma plains, the farmer and the woman of the ridge stood together, not as strangers, but as two souls who had found their forever in the ashes.